I can but repeat the only toast of the evening. Uncle John Fritz, the fire god, the Iron King, our Vulcan, our great naval leader, and as well our kind and gentle-hearted brother. To John Fritz!
Proud and grateful as I was for all the kind things said about me and my life's work that evening, whatever good I accomplished has been due to the true and loyal workmen in the various departments to whom I am much indebted. My aim in life has always been to do the best I knew how and to make no fuss about it.
Born in 1822, John Fritz grew up on the family farm in Chester County, Pennsylvania. His father took on jobs as a millwright and mechanic. Young John would later recall carrying his father's toolbox while accompanying him to work. He was mesmerized by what he saw.
When I could spare the time, I would spend it in the manufacturing department. All of the machinery interested me greatly, but the shuttle flying or shooting from side to side was a mystery that I was unable to solve.
As a young man, Fritz apprenticed for a blacksmith. There he was inspired by the well-rounded ingenuity of the smiths he worked with. His goal was to learn as much as possible, and he accepted positions that would give him the opportunity to learn every step of the iron business. John met Ellen Maxwell. They married in 1851, and a few years later, they welcomed a daughter named Gertrude. In June of 1854, Fritz received an offer to work at Cambria Iron Works in Johnstown, Pennsylvania.
My family and I landed in Johnstown at about 9 o'clock at night. It was a dark and uninviting place. Looking down the Kamina in the direction of the works, the only light that could be seen was a reflection from the coke ovens. We spent a quiet night at a hotel. After breakfast in the morning, I went out to see how the town looked in daylight. I can truly say it was the most unattractive place I had ever been in.
Fritz was determined to manufacture the highest quality iron rail possible. Using the existing two-high mill pass process gave the rails too much time to cool in between passes. This made the rails brittle, and the mill seemed to always be breaking down. Fritz set about finding a better method.
My proposal was to build a new train of rolls, 3 high and 20 inches in diameter. To this proposition they demurred, saying that it could not be done, as the expense was too great. The powers that be in Cambria ridiculed the idea of a new and untried method. Iron makers had told them that the whole thing was a wild experiment and was sure to end in failure, and that young, determined, crack-brained Fritz would ruin the company. It was a Sunday that Vice President Edward Townsend and myself quietly and seriously talked over the history of the past, the difficulties of the present, and the uncertainties of the future. After a full discussion of Cambria Iron Company's condition at the time, he turned to me and said, "Fritz, go ahead and build the mill as you want it."
The rail-making process Fritz developed at Cambria would fast-track the American iron and steel industry. High-quality iron rail was now available stateside rather than through import from England alone. The story of his accomplishments and mechanical genius spread across the region. He caught the attention of Robert Sayre, the chief engineer of the Lehigh Valley Railroad. Sayre tried to convince Fritz to relocate to Bethlehem to head up the new ironworks that was taking shape. It took several months of negotiations, where Fritz finally agreed to a package of a $5,000 annual salary and 40 shares of stock, with 20 more shares on each subsequent year through 1864. Sayre secured the use of Fritz's mill patent free of charge for Bethlehem. Fritz agreed to design, construct, and oversee the building of the new Bethlehem Rolling Mill and Iron Company. But 1860 was the beginning of a series of new challenges, the likes of which Fritz could never have anticipated.
On the morning of the 5th of July, 1860, my family, wife, daughter, and I, boarded a train on the Pennsylvania Railroad at Johnstown, Pennsylvania for Bethlehem. leaving the scenes of my early struggles behind me to enter into another of much greater importance.
Shortly after moving to Bethlehem, John and Ellen tragically lost their daughter Gertrude at the age of 7. Civil War broke out in 1861, and destructive floodwaters gutted the new ironworks at Bethlehem in 1862.
If it had not been for the interesting and exciting character of the business, but few men would be willing to incur the trouble and anxiety to endure the physical labor and danger to which he and the workmen were constantly exposed. During the summer and fall of 1862, the mill was completed, and in September 1863, we commenced rolling rails. Every department worked entirely satisfactorily. The roll housings were of a new design. The furnace plates being corrugated were strong and handsome. The building was of stone, good masonry. The train was of the largest diameter used in any rail mill in the country. In addition to the rolling mill, we had erected a large machine shop and foundry, a blacksmith shop and a pattern shop, all built of stone in first-class manner. Altogether, they made a fine show, and were for some years a mecca for the iron men to visit. There was nothing in the world in the way of an iron plant that could be compared with the Bethlehem Works.
Then, in 1864, Fritz received a government commission to build a rail mill in Chattanooga, Tennessee, to manufacture rail, replacing those damaged during the war. His brother William, who had served in the Army, was appointed superintendent of the plant. Later that year, the Bessemer process of making steel was introduced to the United States. Fritz struggled to locate a suitable iron ore to use in the Bessemer process, but took a chance in building the Bessemer rail mill at the Bethlehem Works in hopes the right ore would soon be discovered. He started building the foundations for the mill in the fall of 1868.
My brother George once said that he did not believe there was a man who ever went into the Bessemer business who did not at times wish he had never gone into it. The Bessemer process was spectacular, beautiful, exciting, and most intensely interesting, but the difficulties that confronted us in the early manufacture of steel were grave and almost innumerable.
Then Fritz introduced the open hearth process, called the Siemens-Martin process, and tapped the first heat in 1887.
The Siemens-Martin process is scientific and simple. It is not so interesting and exciting as the Bessemer process, and it did not command the attention and respect to which it was entitled. But the fact that it so modestly made its way into general use does not in any way detract from its great usefulness. And with the later introduction of the Thomas and Gilchrist basic process and its application to the Siemens furnace, the basic open hearth process takes rank as the greatest metallurgical discovery of the age.
Fritz continued to push ahead. He visited the world's premier steel companies in Europe. Inspired by what he saw, he was confident that similar operations could be even more successful at Bethlehem. But convincing the powers that be at the iron company proved to be more of a challenge. Many board members at Bethlehem Iron were not quick to jump towards the structural steel market that Fritz saw looming. He urged them to consider building a plate mill, but that was also met with hesitancy. Then Fritz pleaded with them to enter into the forging business.
I tried to get the directors to build a forge plant. For a time, I thought I was going to be successful, as the general manager seemed in favor of the project. But all at once, he changed his views, giving as a reason that the president was opposed to going into anything new. But the condition of the country was such that it was apparent in my mind that a good forge and armor plant was indispensable. I had armor plate in my mind from the beginning. Practically speaking, we were in the most defenseless condition, having neither a navy nor modern guns for land or coast defense. We were at the mercy of the world, a disgraceful condition for a great nation to be in.
Tasked with managing the production of heavy guns and armor to expand the U.S. Navy fleet, Lieutenant William Jacques came to Bethlehem to talk over the subject of building a forge plant under a contract with the Sir Joseph Whitworth plant in Manchester, England.
This was just what I wanted, and what the country in some way must have. I well knew it would be a fight of my life to carry it through. I made up my mind to enter the arena with sleeves rolled up, to do or die, as something must be done.
Fritz finally convinced the board of directors to allow him to travel to Whitworth's Manchester Works to investigate what would be needed for developing a forge and armor plate division at the Bethlehem plant.
The general manager one day placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "John, you have done more than any other man to draw us into this wild scheme, and I am going to hold you responsible for the result." I was not discouraged by this, and I told the general manager that I would assume the responsibility, and that I had had much more at stake than he had. What I wanted was truly gigantic. They generally thought it was a wild and visionary scheme. It would take a vast amount of money, and they could not see where the money was to come from, and failure was sure to take place. Some said we had been making money and they could see no reason for a change. I replied, "I'm confident that a plant such as I propose will be a paying investment and an honor to us all. Now, to prove to you my confidence in it, I will agree to carry my share of the capital as far as possible, and further I will say, if I had the money, I would put in $500,000. After this, Mr. Wilbur beckoned me to come out. He then said, "If the government should want no work, would there be work in the country to keep the forging plant busy?" I said, "Not today, but put the forging plant up and let the engineers know what they can get, and then once we'll soon grow up to it." He then said, "We will build the plant." I at once went to work, having the plans of building and machinery well thought out, and had drawings made for the largest and most complete plant that had ever been designed for such a purpose, and the work was completed as planned.
The Bethlehem plant was the first in the country to be built for the purpose of making armor plate for the United States government.
When I look back to my early days in the iron business long, long ago, it brings to mind some of the happiest periods in my life. How little do the younger men who now have charge of the great iron and steel industries know or even think of the severe mental strain, the great amount of bodily toil, the vexation, the surprises, and the disappointments that had to be endured by the men in charge during the perfection of these vast establishments that are now engaged in the manufacture of iron and steel. And let me here say that this great work was not accomplished by command, but by example. It was the men in training who perfected and put in operation those most marvelous enterprises of the age. Steel is largely used in the construction of all grades of machinery employed in the manufacturing arts. It is the base of our immense inland system of transportation. It is this imperial metal that has enabled the engineer to perform the daring and remarkable engineering feats which he has accomplished during the last half of the century. Without it, they would have been practically impossible. It is to the invention, introduction, and perfection of the modern system of steelmaking in this country that we are indebted for the education of our people in the scientific, mechanical, and metallurgical arts. We find steel asserting its value through every walk of life and extending through every clime, linking hands in bonds which grow broader and stronger with the years, till even now we can see dimly on the horizon the longed-for era of eternal peace.
In 1899, Bethlehem Iron Company changed its name to the Bethlehem Steel Company. The ironworks that Fritz established had geared up for the 20th century. A new age of structural steel was looming, and Fritz was well aware of what Bethlehem could do by taking the right risks and banking on innovation.